There are some decisions we make with our minds, and there are decisions we make with our hearts. Sometimes the two agree with each other, but sometimes they take us in completely different directions. And when that happens, the choice we make can change the rest of our lives. Imagine being a young woman who has grown up in a respectable and comfortable family, surrounded by people who love you and believe they know what is best for your future. Imagine having a life that is safe, predictable, and carefully planned for you. Now imagine suddenly meeting someone who makes you question everything you have ever been taught about love, marriage, and happiness. This is where the story of Bamdad-e Khomar begins. At the center of this story is a young woman named Monir. She grows up in a family where tradition, reputation, and social expectations have an important place. Her family wants her to have a secure future. They want her to marry someone suitable, someone from a respectable background, someone who can offer her stability and a life similar to the one she has always known. But Monir is young, and like many young people, she doesn't necessarily see the future in the same way her family does. For her, life is beginning to become more than rules and expectations. She wants to experience something of her own. She wants to make a choice that belongs to her. And then she meets Rahim. Rahim is different from the kind of man her family would have imagined for her. His background is different, his lifestyle is simpler, and there are significant differences between his world and Monir's world. But when Monir meets him, she doesn't focus on those differences. She focuses on how he makes her feel. He gives her attention. He makes her feel special. He introduces her to a world that feels unfamiliar and exciting. And slowly, almost without realizing it, Monir begins to think about him more and more. At first, it may seem like simple curiosity. Then it becomes excitement, and eventually it becomes something she believes is love. This is one of the most important moments in the story, because Monir is not simply choosing a man, she is beginning to choose an entirely different life. And psychologically, that distinction matters. When someone has lived a protected and controlled life, the first experience of freedom can feel incredibly powerful. The person who introduces that freedom may become associated with the feeling itself. In other words, Monir may not only be attracted to Rahim as a person, she may also be attracted to what Rahim represents. He represents freedom. He represents independence. He represents the possibility of making a decision without asking her family for permission. And when those feelings become connected to one person, separating the person from the idea can become extremely difficult. This is why the objections from Monir's family have such a strong effect on her. Her family sees the differences between her and Rahim. They think about practical matters. They think about the future. They wonder whether the two of them will actually be compatible once the excitement of romance disappears. Monir, however, is looking at the present. She is thinking about what she feels right now. And this is a very human way of thinking. When emotions are intense, the present can become much more important than the future. We know that problems may exist, but we don't feel them yet. We know that marriage requires responsibility, but responsibility is still an abstract idea. We know that financial problems can damage relationships, but if we have never experienced financial pressure inside a marriage, it is difficult to understand how deeply it can affect two people. Monir's family tries to warn her. They want her to slow down. They want her to think carefully. But the more they oppose their relationship, the more strongly Monir feels that she must defend it. And this is where another psychological phenomenon begins to appear. When we become emotionally committed to a decision, criticism of that decision can feel like criticism of ourselves. If Khomar accepts that her family may be right, she has to consider the possibility that her feelings may not be enough. That is difficult to accept, so instead of becoming less certain, she becomes more determined. She tells herself that her family doesn't understand her feelings. She tells herself that they are too concerned with social differences. She tells herself that love matters more than everything else. And perhaps at that moment, she genuinely believes it. This is not necessarily because she is unintelligent. It is because human beings are very good at protecting decisions that they have already emotionally invested in. Once we have chosen something, especially after defending it against other people, we naturally want evidence that proves we were right. We look for reasons that support our decision and become less willing to listen to information that challenges it. Psychologists often describe this tendency through concepts such as confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance. But we don't need complicated psychological terminology to understand what is happening. Imagine telling yourself every day that you have chosen the right person. Then imagine someone close to you saying, maybe you're making a mistake. Those two ideas cannot easily coexist, so the mind tries to remove the discomfort. It becomes easier to reject the warning than to question the decision. And this is exactly why the conflict between Khomar and her family becomes so intense. For Khomar, this is no longer simply a disagreement about marriage. It becomes a battle over her independence. She believes that if she gives up Rahim, she is also giving up the right to choose her own life. And that makes the decision much more emotional. She isn't only protecting a relationship, she is protecting her identity. Eventually, Khomar chooses Rahim. From her perspective, this is an act of courage. She has chosen love instead of social expectations. She has chosen her own feelings instead of the future her family planned for her. And at that moment, she probably feels that she has won. She has followed her heart. She has refused to let other people decide her future. But there is one thing she doesn't fully understand yet. Choosing someone is only the beginning. Living with that choice is something completely different. Marriage changes the nature of a relationship. Before marriage, you often see someone during the most exciting moments of the relationship. You look forward to seeing them, you miss them when they're gone, you talk about the future, you imagine what your life will be like together. But after marriage, ordinary life begins. You see each other when you're tired. You see each other when you're angry. You see each other when money is tight. You see each other when one person has had a terrible day. You see each other's habits, weaknesses, fears, insecurities, and imperfections. And this is where the difference between love and compatibility becomes important. You can deeply love someone and still discover that living with them is difficult. You can be attracted to someone and still have completely different expectations about marriage. You can feel that someone is the love of your life, and later discover that the two of you don't know how to solve problems together. Love creates a connection, but a successful marriage requires much more than emotional connection. It requires communication, patience, responsibility, respect, financial cooperation, emotional maturity, and the ability to accept that the person you love is not a character in your imagination. They are a real human being. Khomar is about to discover this difference. A man she once saw through the eyes of romance is now her husband, and being someone's husband is very different from being the person you secretly dream about. The small differences that seemed unimportant before marriage begin to become more visible. The lifestyle differences remain. The financial differences remain. The differences between their families remain. Marriage doesn't magically erase the circumstances that existed before it, and this is one of the painful truths at the center of Bamdad-e Khomar, Sometimes we believe that love will change reality, but reality doesn't always change because we love someone. If two people come from completely different worlds, marriage doesn't automatically make those worlds identical. Instead, it brings those differences into the same home, and when the excitement begins to fade, those differences can become much harder to ignore. This is when Monir's dream begins to meet reality. She had imagined happiness, but happiness is not a permanent emotional state. A marriage isn't made only from romantic moments. It is made from thousands of ordinary moments. The way two people speak to each other after an argument, the way they deal with money, the way they react to stress, the way they treat each other's families, the way they handle disappointment, the way they respond when life doesn't go according to plan. And perhaps this is something Monir had not been prepared for. She had spent so much energy trying to prove that her love was real that she had not spent enough time asking whether the life she was choosing was right for her. That is a very different question. Do I love him is not the same as, can I build a healthy life with him? The first question is emotional, the second is practical, and a lifelong relationship usually requires both answers to be yes. As Monir's life begins to change, another psychological process becomes important. When someone has sacrificed a great deal for a decision, admitting that the decision may have been wrong becomes extremely painful. Imagine giving up your family's approval for someone. Imagine defending that person again and again. Imagine telling everyone that you know what you're doing. Now imagine reaching a point where you begin to doubt yourself. How easy would it be to admit that you might have made a mistake? Probably not very easy. You might try harder to make the relationship work. You might ignore problems. You might explain them away. You might tell yourself that things will get better. And sometimes they do. But sometimes this hope simply delays the moment when reality has to be faced. This is why Monir's story is psychologically interesting. It is not simply a story about a woman who made a bad decision. It is a story about how people justify decisions they have already made. It is a story about idealization. It is a story about emotional attachment. It is a story about identity. And it is a story about the painful difference between the person we imagine and the person who actually exists. Perhaps Monir did love Rahim, but perhaps she also loved the life she imagined she would have with him. And those two things are not necessarily the same. When we fall in love, we don't just imagine the person. We imagine ourselves beside that person. We imagine who we will become. Our future home, our future family, our future happiness. We don't fall in love with one reality. We often fall in love with an entire future that exists only in our imagination. And when reality doesn't match that future, disappointment can be devastating, because we are not only losing a relationship, we are losing a dream. This is perhaps why regret can be so powerful. Regret isn't always about losing a person. Sometimes it is about losing the version of yourself you thought you would become. Monir had imagined one future. Life was beginning to give her another, and the distance between those two futures was becoming impossible to ignore. Still, we should be careful not to judge her too quickly. It is easy to look at someone else's life after knowing how the story ends and say she shouldn't have known. But Monir didn't know the ending. She was standing at the beginning. She was young. She was experiencing emotions that felt completely real. And when a feeling is real, that doesn't automatically mean the decision based on that feeling will be right. This distinction is one of the greatest lessons we can take from the story. Your feelings can be real and still lead you in the wrong direction. You can genuinely love someone and still be incompatible with them. You can sincerely believe that you're making the right choice and still discover years later that you were wrong. And being wrong doesn't necessarily mean that you were foolish. It means you were human. The real danger is not making a mistake. The real danger is refusing to learn from it because admitting it hurts too much. And this is where Monir's journey becomes much deeper than a simple romantic tragedy. Her story asks us to examine ourselves. Have we ever idealized someone? Have we ever ignored a warning because we didn't want to hear it? Have we ever confused excitement with compatibility? Have we ever defended a decision simply because we had already invested too much in it? And perhaps most importantly, have we ever mistaken the feeling of being free? These questions aren't only about Monir. They are about all of us.